Good morning, everybody. We're going to wait just a couple of minutes for one or two late attendees, and we'll kick off in a moment. And I will introduce our guest speaker and the proceedings for this morning. Don't see any reason why we can't chat in the meantime, Margaret.
No, I think we can chat, probably. Yeah.
Carry on where we were just now.
Talking about modernised.
Your experience of voting in the House of Commons at the moment.
Well, I was just saying how we introduced, at the beginning of lockdown, we introduced digital voting, and it absolutely transformed our lives. You know, dead simple, very straightforward, very quick, very efficient. But Jacob Rees-Mogg, for some unknown reason, decided that he didn't like it. So he stopped it, and it's very irritating. So yesterday was my first day back in the House of Commons, because I, of an age where I was sort of felt at the beginning of the thing I had to be careful. But I went back yesterday, and we had 2 votes, and they took about an hour and a half, hour and a quarter. And crazy.
How long would that normally take?
Normally it's about, normally you're through in 8 minutes.
Right.
It closes in 8 minutes, so it's even in the old way. So digitally, it's a minute, nothing. You just log on and you vote. And they could, I'm sure they could manage the digitization so that, you have to be on the estate. You can't do it from home or from, holiday in Barbados or whatever.
We are now live, both on Zoom and on Facebook. So let me formally welcome you, Dame Margaret Hodge, and thank you for joining us this morning. And to thank everybody who's joined us. I think there's nearly 100 people who are online on one platform or another. And I hope everybody is keeping well in these difficult and challenging times. The event is being recorded. And if you want to watch it again or pass a link on to your friends, it will be available on the UJIA Facebook page. I'm going to be interviewing Margaret for about the next 35 minutes or so. Then there will be an opportunity for you to ask questions. And the way in which you can do so is through the chat function at the bottom of your screen. Which I think many of you will be familiar with, having used it time and time again over the last few months. And if you type in your question, then I will ask it to Margaret. We have 2 more events coming up, which I hope you will be able to join us for. The first is Jerusalem Live event, which takes place on the 24th of September. That's 2 weeks from tomorrow. Where we will be live in the old city of Jerusalem on a guided tour with a well-known guide, and you'll be able to join us for that as it happens. That's at 2:30 in the afternoon, and you'll be able to ask questions to the guide and even put a virtual note in the Western Wall. The other event, which I will endeavour to share my screen on now, is the UJIA Centenary celebration, which takes place on Thursday, the 30th of September. The year 2021 sees UJIA's centenary, and we are very pleased and proud to have an event which will include President Reuben Rivlin, and a special set which has been devised by one of Israel's foremost musicians, Idan Reichel. So I hope you can join us for either or both of those events. I can't share the screen for whatever reason right now, but please go to www.ujia.org for details of both events. UJIA is delighted to be presenting this event to you today. UJIA has 2 main purposes. One is to connect British Jews to Israel, to give them learning, experiencing, and giving opportunities to connect with Israel. And we engage with British Jews of all ages and across the UK, but with a particular focus on young people, on immersive educational experiences, Israel Tour, Birthright, Onward Israel and Masa. We bring Israel into Jewish homes, synagogues, classrooms, and all other venues through online and pre-COVID in-person educational resources and events across an enormous network of partnerships. Wherever you are, UJIA and our partners are there with you too. We help you connect directly with Israelis, whether you're in Israel or in the UK. In Israel itself, our focus for many years now has been on the Galil. And the reason it's been on the Galil is because there we see the greatest disparity between different sectors of Israeli society. Despite the major economic advances that have been achieved in Israel over the last few years, it's opened a gap between rich and poor, as it does in many Western countries. And in the Galil, not least because of the demographic challenges there, the gap between rich and poor is even greater. So we invest in programs and projects that create sustainable solutions to that disadvantage and to try and iron out the inequality and increase social cohesion, working with communities from every conceivable background in that region, whether it's ultra-Orthodox, Muslim and Christian Arabs, Mizrahi, religious, secular, Ethiopian, Bedouin, and others. We improve educational infrastructure with a view to education being that key tool that will enable people to get into employment, to improve their lives, the lives of their families, and ultimately the well-being and economic prosperity of the country. We partner with local and national government and many philanthropic partners, both in Israel and worldwide, in order to deliver on all of this. And with their and your support, we're spreading the opportunity, increasing fairness, and strengthening Israeli society. One of the ways in which you can express that support is through a legacy gift in your will. As you might have seen in the press, this week is Remember a Charity Week. And we hope that UJIA will be one of the charities that you remember when you write or rewrite a will. And in that way, you can create an enduring connection to Israel, the people and the country, and in the most tax efficient way possible. For further details about that, again, see our website, www.ujia.org. And thank you to all of you who are on this session today who have already made that legacy pledge. Just one small point, not small, but one small slip on my part. Our Centenary event, Centenary celebration, is the 30th of September, but that is a Wednesday, not a Thursday. So put it in your diary now, and for further details, the website. Now, let's move on to our very special guest. And again, thank you, Margaret, for joining us today and giving of your time. It's lovely to see you. Can you perhaps just tell us how, in this weird world, the last 6 months or so since the outbreak of this pandemic, how has it affected you personally and professionally as an MP?
Well, I've had to work from home. I'm of an age where I'm a bit more vulnerable, so I've been sort of very, very careful in my interaction with people. And, there's been some good things out of it, and there's been some terrible things. Some days when you've been on Zoom from 8:30 in the morning till 6 at night, you feel so claustrophobic. I've had to open the, doors and go out into the garden just to get a breath of fresh air. And it is sort of different tensions. But there's also been, I've been able to sort of connect with people in a way that I haven't done before. Constituents, ironically, when you're talking to them, it's quite an intimate way of discussing their issues and their problems, which, you can't do it face to face, but you do feel in an enclosed space with them. And I think I've been as effective on Zoom as I am as an MP. I'm looking forward, I've gone back this week, and I'm looking forward now to interacting directly with my colleagues. I do a lot of tax justice work in the House of Commons, and that has been a bit constrained. I want to try to move amendments to bills, and you can't do that remotely. So getting back actually into the chamber, I think will help me be even more effective.
Over the last few years, obviously, anti-Semitism in the Labour Party has been a major issue, and we'll come back to that, of course, a little later. But perhaps you would just share with us initially something of your early life. Tell me, first of all, how it was that you came to be born in Cairo. By the way, for everybody listening and watching, on the 8th of September, 1944. So happy birthday for yesterday.
Thank you, thank you.
But how was it that you came to be born of Ashkenazi parents? Your father was German, your mother Austrian, in Cairo.
Well, the first thing is, don't believe everything you read in Wikipedia, because I wasn't born in Cairo. I was born in Alexandria, which actually was, you know, I've got very, very fond memories, left there at the age of 4. So my father went to Egypt, actually at the end of the 20s, 28, 29, when there was a recession in Germany. He couldn't get a job. He had an uncle running a little stockyard in Alexandria, and he went there. My mother is a slightly different story in that she came from Vienna. Family mythology has it that she had a boyfriend and went down the Nile with the boyfriend to Alexandria. He turned out to be a Nazi, went and they split up. And her family told her to stay in Egypt. It was already beginning to be a bit difficult. And so she stayed and met my father. We were there, I was born there in 1944, 48, with the foundation of Israel. Life started getting a bit difficult for Jews in Egypt. And in 48, as early as 48, my dad had a stone thrown through the window of his office in the stockyard. And obviously the Holocaust, where I lost a lot, like many people, you know, who are participating, I lost a lot of family, was very raw for him, and he decided to get out of Egypt. And the interesting thing is we were stateless. He'd lost his German citizenship. We were totally stateless. He tried to get to Australia and they wouldn't have us. He wanted to go to an English-speaking country. I can't quite work out, you know, never asked him the question why, but the Australians turned him down, the Canadians turned him down, the Americans turned him down. And the Brits were the only ones to accept him. So he was forever, as I am, grateful to the British for allowing. We were a family. We were 5 children. By the time we came here, 4. One of my sisters was born here, but allowing this family to come and settle here. And I do have one interesting story, and there's a lot of stories. So at the age of 9. We'd been here for 5 years, and my dad was very keen for us to have British citizenship. So we were applying for British citizenship. And at that time, my mother was terminally ill in hospital. So my dad was more or less on his own. My older sister was at university. My brother was away at school. And there were 2 of us, me and my younger sister, sort of 9, and she must have been, I was probably 10. She was maybe 7, right thereabouts. And we had to go through this process to acquire British citizenship. And I have this strong memory today of an inspector coming to the house for tea to see how English we were. And we used to, in those days, have sort of boiled eggs with bits of toast, you know, with the fingers of toast that you dip into the egg. And on that day, we had cucumber sandwiches and fruitcake. And I hated fruitcake, probably being born in Egypt. I hated dried fruit. I was used to sort of succulent, fresh fruits. But we were made to eat that. And my dad said, tell them this is what you have every day. And then we were interrogated as to who our friends were, what books we read, what games we played. And it's an interesting reflection when you think about immigration today, that actually it was a pretty hostile environment. But my dad, on my Jewishness, we arrived here. My family were assimilators. through generations. So, you know, Leopoldstadt, anybody who's been, seen Leopoldstadt, that very much reflected my mother's family in Vienna and my dad similarly in Germany. So when we arrived here, we moved to South London. We had relatives there, not North London, where most of the new Jews were sort of had coalesced. And we were brought up completely, you know, my father was very, very anxious that we should be accepted as British citizenship. So I wasn't brought up with any of the religious traditions and all that sort of stuff. But all our friends were Jewish refugees. And I often say, again, as a joke, that, you know, my dad did try and make me a bit Jewish, but it wasn't very successful. The local rabbi tried, he wasn't very successful. I went to LSE, and of course, there were a lot of Jewish students with whom who became lifelong friends from those days. They tried to make me Jewish. That wasn't very successful. It took one Jeremy Corbyn to establish my Jewish identity.
We'll come to it in a moment. But it's interesting because, you know, there's no problem today for any of us to be proudly British and proudly Jewish. But what you're suggesting is that really for your father, you had to choose one or the other.
I think he was so anxious. I mean, you know, I'm the first generation in our family who has, or my children are, not me, because I'm an immigrant. My children are the first generation who have not had to flee from their home because of anti-Semitism. And one of my lasting memories of my father was him telling me, always keep a suitcase at the front door in case you have to leave in a hurry. So I think he was really anxious to become accepted by British society so that he could establish roots. And it came out of that. It came out of, it's all, I mean, I think there are a lot of Jews like me in Britain today, but it's sort of, it was odd. When I look back on it now, it was odd. And it is very, you know, I don't know if this is the experience of other people who are participating here, but my grandmother was killed by Hitler on my mother's side. I mean, it's a tragic, tragic story that she was in Vienna and she chose not to leave because she was in her mid-50s. And she thought Hitler would leave she thought she was old and people would leave her alone. And two of my sisters are now uncovering all the letters and the journals and the diaries, which are a rich, rich source of family history, as many, many of us have. And, you know, they're letters from various relatives sending her money because they, you know, kicked her out of her home, charged her massive rents, which she couldn't afford. She didn't have money for food. There's letters about her seeing 1,000 Jews being marched out of Vienna every week. That she talks about having to have the Star of David on her clothes. And then there's a final letter she wrote 9 days before she was taken, and she never even got into a concentration camp. She was killed in a trench outside the camp, to her son, my uncle, who by that time was in America, in which, and it must have been a censored letter, in which she says 3 times, "Don't forget me completely." Now, it's an incredibly powerful, I know a lot of others have these powerful memories, but my mother never, ever talked about her own mother's death. It was sort of, I don't know, it was you know, again, she died when I was very young, but yeah, it was a sort of different culture. And, you know, I think there was this sort of anxiety to get accepted.
Yes. Let's come on to your political career. You were leader of Islington Council from 1982 to 1992 and became the MP for Barking and I think parts of Dagenham in 1994. So you've been the MP there for over 25 years now. In Tony Blair's government, you held various ministerial posts. And then when, after the 2010 election and the Blair government fell, you took up a chairmanship of the very prestigious Public Accounts Committee, for which a position which you held for 5 years until 2015. Looking back across all of those different elements of your career, which do you feel most proud of, or which had the greatest impact?
That's such a difficult question, Harvey, if I can say so, because there's lots I'm proud of. I think, I mean, ironically, in Islington, those were difficult days because it was sort of loony lefty days, you know, when we were trying to keep, it was the 1980s were not unlike the days that the 2015 to 2019 days, if the Labour Party, where we had the you know, ultra leftists taking over the party. They were difficult days. But I'm very proud of the housing program I built in Islington those days, which provided decent homes at prices rents people could afford in these gorgeous Georgian houses. Within those days, the only form of, in the 1970s, the only form of power in many of those houses was gas. So the lighting was gas. So that, and, you know, obviously no inside lavatories, bathrooms. I'm proud of that. I'm very proud of my fight against the BNP in Barking. I think that was a 4-year struggle. It took me, you know, the Labour Party had completely disconnected with local people. There was massive immigration, very rapid change in there. And that was a real struggle to, you know, which I think the Red Wall, or the so-called Red Wall constituents today could learn from, where we did everything to reconnect with local people, to rebuild trust in Labour. And I'm really proud of having actually, you know, completely thrashed Nick Griffin. And, you know, and thanks to the Jewish community at that time, ironically, they put their hands in their pockets and helped a lot with sort of funding a lot of the work we did. And I'm very proud of my time in the Public Accounts Committee, which, although I'm proud of things I did as a minister, but in the Public Accounts Committee, the power of voice to draw attention to wrongdoings in the way that waste of taxpayers' money, or paying tax itself, you know, that we all ought to pay a fair share and not deliberately avoid or evade paying our tax. Getting that debate out of the hands of the professionals into the pub or onto the dinner table, you know, there's people now talk about it and care about it. I'm really proud of that. And I'm proud, most proud, I don't know what's most important to me, but the fight against anti-Semitism, which has been the most difficult and, you know, tiring, and just, you know, it's just been horrible, horrible, horrible challenge of everything that I hold dear. I'm also proud of that.
So coming on to that, I mean, you've been a member of the Labour Party for 57 years, I believe.
I joined 18, yeah.
You must have known Jeremy Corbyn for a large part of that time, not least because you were leading Islington Council, where he was the MP and lived. What were your, until he became leader of the party, what was your view of Jeremy Corbyn? Did you always regard his left-wing views as dangerous?
I didn't take them very seriously, if I'm absolutely honest. I mean, when I was leader in Islington, he was more focused on what was happening in Nicaragua than he was in what was happening in Islington. He's actually been always quite a good constituents MP in terms of dealing with casework, so he never caused me trouble. And actually, in the very early days of 2015, when I opposed him, I think his worldview is appalling. I think his view, you know, his concept of what is required of government, of the Labour Party, is utterly wrong. I never saw him in 2015 as an anti-Semite. I've got to say that. I always thought, you know, he was an anti-racist, and I defended him. Actually, when people said to me, he's definitely anti-Semitic, I said, no, I don't think he is. I think he's just got a crazy worldview. And I've changed my mind on that. I mean, I don't know if this is an appropriate time, Harvey, but just to read to you. So 2015, I deeply opposed him. I mean, I was the author of the motion of no confidence against him in 2016, which some people have criticised. I actually think we should have carried on with those motions and got rid of him well before 2019. But
that was to do with his stance on the referendum, on the Brexit referendum, wasn't it?
Well, it became a way of getting into it. By 2016, you know, I was beginning to get the anti-Semitism. I mean, I suddenly started, taking it back a step, my Jewish identity had never really played a role in my political work. I joined the Labour Party because I was a Jew, partly because I was an immigrant Jew. And the Labour Party to me was the natural home, as it was to thousands of Jews, the natural home for people who were anti-racist, who believed in international solidarity and who believed in equality. It was the natural home. If you look at, if you do go on to, if you Google Jewish MPs, you'll see that up until the 80s, most Jewish MPs were Labour MPs. And it's actually the trend of now. I'm the last woman Jewish Labour MP. There's one other who's a converted Jew. And there are 2 or 3 male MPs, but go back to the sort of 60s, the Wilson government, and they were all Jewish MPs.
Yeah.
So I never thought, it never became part of me. And then when Jeremy Corbyn became our leader, there's always been anti-Semitism on the extremes of the Labour Party, on the extreme wings. It's always been present there. But he allowed it to move from the fringes to the mainstream, and he gave it legitimacy. I mean, I'll tell you another interesting story. In the 80s, this is going back a long way, I was leader in Islington. Ken Livingstone ran the GLC, and we used to have meetings with him, and I'd come home and he'd always sneer at me about my maiden name is Oppenheimer, so he'd make some sneery comments about that, and he'd sneer about my dad's business. And I'd come home and say to my husband, do you know, I think he's been anti-Semitic. And then I'd say to myself, but he can't be, because he's an anti-racist. And I really, of course, now, today I recognize he was being anti-Semitic. But in those days, it was sort of,
Is it perhaps also because your experience with the BNP sort of categorized anti-Semitism as an issue of the far right rather than the far left?
Well, let me tell you 2 shocking stories about that. Actually, the anti-Semitism, I'm going to read to you in a minute a bit of it. The anti-Semitism that I have experienced from the far left through social media, which wasn't around in 2006 to 2010 to the way it is now, as far, far worse than the anti-Semitism I experienced from the BNP. I mean, I got it from the BNP. And on election day, I remember one of the BNP people shouting at me, go back to Germany. And me shouting back at him, I can't, they killed all my relatives. But so it was there. But one of the most shocking stories about this is one of the things, I'm writing a book, which includes a chapter on anti-Semitism at the moment. And my researcher came to my home, and I had all this BNP literature. I had that, I'm also writing a chapter on that out on my desk. And there's a leaflet that they put out in about 2008, 2009, which was just a sort of huge, horrible anti-Hodge leaflet. And on the back, they said things that people say about Margaret Hodge, and it was full of really nasty, nasty stuff. And my guy said to me, where do you get that from? And I said, well, it's one of the anti-BNP leaflets. That has been copied and pasted by the far left and put onto social media now today. So literature of the far right is being used by the far left. And if I don't want to offend, but it's just I don't want to offend people by, so I hope people don't mind if I do a bit of swearing, which I don't normally do, we will come to that. But just to say the sort of thing I get. So I get things like Zionist bitch, Zionist stooge, rancid old cunt, slanderous mendacious Horridon, in the pockets of wealthy Zionists, worst, a couple of shit-stirring cum buckets. Then I get people who write terrible stuff. Why has 0.5% of our population got so much power? Rid us of this cancer. Jeremy Corbyn is the final solution to the Blairite Zionist question. And then finally, I mean, I could go on of thousands of these things. She is a deceitful, lying, hateful bitch who needs to be executed publicly. The only support she deserves is a handrail to climb the gallows, the vile fucking cunt. So sorry if I've offended people by reading that, but that just demonstrates really the vile nature the anti-Semitism, and which I experienced. And then, of course, my colleagues, people like Luciana Berger, Louise Ellman, and Ruth Smeeth, in particular, the women, we were subject to much, much greater abuse, partly because we stood up against the anti-Semitism. We were the ones to stand up against it. But also as women, we get it more.
Yeah. But you did refer to it sort of a little earlier about how you'd not always been an outspoken Jew. You've been an outspoken MP, an outspoken Labour Party member, an outspoken woman, but not necessarily an outspoken Jew, until the debate in the House, as I see it, the debate in the House of Commons in April 2018 on anti-Semitism, when, if I may say so, and please tell me if this is a correct analysis, that you sort of put your head above the parapet as a Jew for the first time and spoke very movingly about your experiences of anti-Semitism within the party, and also very movingly about a visit to Auschwitz. Is that a fair analysis, that was a sort of a light bulb moment or a light bulb period for you as a Jew that suddenly made you want to stand up and be counted?
Well, it happened before. I mean, 2015, 2016, when I started getting this anti-Semitic abuse, I was very close to Luciana Berger. And I remember, I just approached her and said, this is crazy. We've got to start getting together. Now, she was already involved with the Jewish labor movement and with, trying to get Corbyn and his allies to see sense. So I was very, very active, both in the Parliamentary Labour Party, probably from 2016, 2017 onwards. My first public coming out on it, you're probably right, was at the Holocaust debate in 2018. I mean, obviously, I'm trying to think of, probably got the timing wrong. There was also the demonstration in Parliament Square, and I, of course, went along to that. That was about the same time, really.
That was, I think, Enough is Enough.
Yeah, that was about the same time, wasn't it? It was, yeah.
It was, yes, it was.
And then, of course, what came out was the definition of anti-Semitism became the symbolic sort of cause on which we all coalesced.
And on that issue, on that definition, the issue for the Labour Party, or rather the issue for Jeremy Corbyn, was not that they wouldn't adopt the definition, but that they would not accept the various examples. And one of the theories behind that is because Corbyn would have regarded it as a way in which his criticism of Israel would become stifled. Now, you have been an outspoken critic of the government of Israel, of various policies of Israel. But I think it would be true to say that you're able to distinguish that from support for Israel, both as a principle and as a Jewish homeland. If you were able to do that, why wasn't Jeremy Corbyn? Why weren't others able to distinguish between those two different positions?
It's a very good question, and it's really I've thought about it a lot, and there is I think it emanates from a sort of worldview, this sort of crazy worldview of the hard left. I mean, Palestine, the whole Palestinian question is a totally totemic issue, completely disproportionately to other issues around the world. If you think of you can think of endless conflicts where there's, rights of minority citizens is an issue, but it's a totemic issue for the extreme left. Why? And I think it tied up with with anti-Semitism, that Jews are seen to be rich. The Rothschilds get the worst abuse of any Jews, I think, probably in the world because of their wealth. So we're seen to be rich. And if you're on the extreme left, you're against capitalism, you're against wealth. There's all that sort of stuff going on. There is the Palestinian issue of the Palestinian, getting a two-state solution if we ever get to that, which is, actually, I don't think Corbyn believes in it. I think Corbyn just wants Israel to be abolished. I don't believe he believes in the two-state solution. And I think also there's an anti-American. So, they're Corbyn throughout his 4 years of leadership was totally anti-American. Think of how he dealt with the poisoning of the Russians, those sort of issues. And somehow Jews are a much more potent political force in America. We are a powerful lobby in America in a way that we're probably not in Britain. So it feeds into the anti-capitalism, anti-American Palestinian issue. And they just don't distinguish. They're totally unable to distinguish between the support of the existence of the state of Israel, which I am absolutely passionately committed to, and legitimate criticism of various political governments within Israel at various times, which I think is perfectly possible under the ARA definition. But that became the symbolic test. And it's not true. I mean, Jeremy went to the meeting of our ruling body to deliberately amend, which is why I got so cross with him, to deliberately amend a definition that everybody else had accepted. And for him to do that from a position of weakness, when his record on anti-Semitism was also up for question, was not just crass politics, but was an act, to me, of anti-Semitism.
Following that refusal by the NEC of the Labour Party to adopt those examples, there's a famous example, famous incident, which I've got to ask you about, which allegedly occurred behind the Speaker's chair in the House of Commons, where you confronted Jeremy Corbyn and, according to one account, called him an anti-Semite and racist to his face. And according to another account, called him an effing anti-Semite and racist. Please tell us which is correct.
The first, I mean, it was on the night that the NEC had met to discuss the ARA definition. And it was also one of the evenings when we were having endless votes on Europe. So, I mean, you could question, really, should that have been the day when the NEC met? We should have been focusing on Brexit and those issues. And so we were hanging around the lobby, and I was behind the Speaker's chair with two friends. And I was furious. I was pretty angry. And I said, I'm going to call him. These are two young men. And I said, I'm going to call him an effing anti-Semitic racist. And they said, go on, Margaret, go in there and do it. And he was sitting on the front bench. And I said, no, I'm going to wait for him to come out. They rushed away. I didn't realize one of them was going to brief the newspapers. Jeremy comes out. And the last thing I said to myself was, don't swear, Margaret, because that will undermine the strength of your argument. So I did confront him, and I did say to him that his actions demonstrated that he was both anti-Semitic and therefore racist. He started quoting stuff at me. He's sort of passive-aggressive in those situations. And I said, I'm fed up of what he sort of claims to say. It's what he does. And that he was making the Labour Party a hostile environment. He was creating a hostile environment for Jews in the Labour Party. And it was about 5-10 minutes, and that was it. And I felt a little bit better. I was pretty angry, and they had to quieten me down with a glass of water and, calm me down. And then I went off to the theatre. So that was it, I thought, for the evening, switched off my phone, came out of the theatre, put it on again, and realized that the world had gone bananas, and that one of these two guys that I had talked to before I actually had the confrontation had gone to the press. And that was what started it. And then, of course, the following morning, just to finish what was a funny story, was I came in, I had terrible, terrible toothache. So I had to go to the dentist to sort out my teeth. And I was sort of sitting in the dentist chair. And I'd taken my PA with me because the phone had just not stopped ringing. So I thought she could field calls. And then she came into the surgery and said, Margaret, Luciana's on the phone and she's insisting on speaking to you. And there was I struggling to keep my mouth open to have this dental treatment. But she insisted, and Luciana told me that they were taking action to try and expel me after 57 years from the Labour Party.
How did that how did that, I mean, putting aside the fact that the disciplinary action against you and the potential, was about bringing the party into disrepute because of your confrontation with Jeremy Corbyn, but how did it make you feel as a loyal member of the party for so long, and as somebody who I assume would take the view that the party had departed from you rather than you departed? How did it make you feel to have that action taken against you?
Well, it's quite odd, this, because my instant reaction was, oh my God, it means I can't talk to I've created Barking Labour Party, to fight the BNP. So it was I won't be allowed to talk to any of them ever again in a meeting. So it was a bit of a fear, but the general thing, I mean, people often ask me a question, why did I stay? Why didn't I go? The Labour Party has been around for, 120 years now. The Jewish Labour movement is the oldest affiliated organisation to the Labour Party, affiliated well before the trade unions. And I've been a member forever. And I wasn't going to allow one, man who's, in the end, history will see this as a terrible blip. But I wasn't going to allow him to change the basic values that had brought me into the Labour Party without a fight. And I thought I was better fighting from the inside. You are more effective fighting from the inside on that than fighting from the outside. So
others took a different view, didn't they? They decided
took a different view, and completely. But I mean, perhaps something.
Did it ever cross your mind that perhaps, given what had happened, that the right thing to do, or rather the inescapable conclusion, was that you had to resign the party?
Well,
it no longer represented.
Of course, I mean, of course, I did. I thought it was worth fighting, and perhaps I'll share with your view, the people in on this seminar. I just I respect everybody who took a different view. Some felt they just couldn't tolerate it more, came out. I thought, I'm going to not allow this man to take over my party. But the other thing I had promised myself was that were it ever to come to the position where there was a hung parliament, at that point, I would do everything that I could, along with probably there were a dozen colleagues who would have joined me, which would have stopped Corbyn ever becoming leader and prime minister. So you can argue which of us was right. It was as hard to stay as it was to leave. It was just hard times, and people just came to different judgments. And I think history will say, I feel it was right to stay, because look. What is so extraordinary is I thought the battle post-Corbyn would be the biggest battle of my lifetime, bigger than the battle of BNP. And I was up for doing that as my final struggle within the party. And actually, the hard left has disintegrated. And I can't tell you, I'm still sometimes wake up in the morning, can't believe that I can relax a little bit more about being a Labour Party member, and that Keir Starmer hasn't happened yet. It'll take. There are other things he has to do, and we've got the EHRC report imminent. I think probably after the Rosh Hashanah period. Now it'll be published probably in October. I think. Now we haven't heard since, but those recommendations.
By the way, I've got a couple more questions, and then I'm going to open it to the floor. So. Please, I've had a couple of questions on the chat, but if you have a question, please do submit it. But on that EHRC report, what's your best guess about what it will say and what implications it will have for Jeremy Corbyn, Seamus Milne, Chris Williamson and Carrie Murphy and others within the party, Jenny Formby maybe?
It's really difficult. I haven't seen it, and it's being very tightly controlled. So, it's very, very difficult to get leaks. So will it call the Labour Party institutionally racist? I'm not sure it'll go quite that far. But will it name individuals? My understanding is yes. So are they individuals who still have a role in the party? Well, we'll have to see. Both, Jenny Formby and Kerry Murphy are now, Keir Starmer has sort of removed them both from positions of influence, and Seamus Milne has gone, but and Chris Williamson is no longer in, you know, so that it's begun the cleanup. I mean, I slightly regret, if I'm honest, that Keir hasn't initiated other action. He says he's waiting for the EHRC, but I think we absolutely desperately need an independent complaints mechanism, which cannot be politically manipulated in the way that that complaints mechanism was by Corbyn and his allies. And I think we need to institute a very strong educational training just on the issues that we were talking about, so that people understand the difference between criticism of Israeli governments and support for anti-Semitism and attitudes to the existence of the state of Israel. So I think we should have got on with that. Where Keir has shown total determination is that he will not tolerate anti-Semitism by and that leading members, and the Rebecca Long Bailey backing is probably the best example of that. But there are other examples of people who have been suspended from membership of the Labour Party because of things that they have posted online.
I've got a question. Thank you very much for that, Margaret. I've got one or two more questions if we have time from myself, but I want to hand over to one or two from the floor now. One question from David Shamash. Is it not good news that Labour lost the 2019 elections so decisively, so that now the Labour Party has a new leader and is hopefully reformed and will no longer be anti-Semitic? So, you know, the question is, you know, what will Keir Starmer do? How will Labour change? And I think if I could add to David's question, you know, lots of Jews left the party. Lots of Jews would no longer vote Labour, even though, as you said earlier, historically, it would have been the natural home of Jewish people. Can it ever be a safe home for Jewish votes again?
I think that's going to take a long time. I don't think this is a quick fix. So to rebuild trust in the Labour Party as the natural home for Jews will take a long time. One of the things that sort of fills me with a little bit of hope and is actually the Jewish Labour movement, which is full of very young, you know, people well under 30 who share those lasting values that drew me to the Labour Party, you know, nearly 60 years ago, of belief in equality and internationalism, all those things, and anti-racism. And so I feel buoyed by that. Is it a good thing we lost that election so drastically? Well, it's a good thing that we got rid of Jeremy Corbyn. One of my regrets, I mean, people disagree with me about this in the party, is I think we should have been passing motions of no confidence on him every year, not just 2060 and then saying, oh my God, we shouldn't do it again, and hope that the electorate got rid of him, not the Labour Party. It was the electorate that got rid of him. And I regret that. I think the Labour Party should have, you know, reformed and got rid of him. And then as a Labour Party politician, I regret that we have such a mountain to climb to get back into power. You know, politics is about power to change society according to your values. And I particularly regret that at a time when I don't want to read parties down to this audience, but when we are seeing absolutely an appalling regime in so many, many ways under Boris Johnson. So, you know, however hard we're trying now, it's very hard to reestablish our credibility. So we went down far too far, and had we within ourselves got rid of him and not depended on the electorate to do so, we might have been further along the road to regaining the confidence and support of the public in Britain.
While we're on the subject of the 2019 election, there was a move to deselect you from the Barking constituency, notwithstanding 25 years of loyal service. What do you put that down to? Was it anti-Semitism? Was it misogyny? Was it dissatisfaction with you as a constituency MP? What was that all about?
Certainly not dissatisfaction as a constituency MP, because I'm seen as one of the more proactive and, better, because of my fight against the BNP. I do my politics in a very different way from many MPs. I'm very, very, very closely connected to my constituents. I think it was the Corbynites. It was the Corbynites. They didn't manage to get rid of me by disciplining me out of the party. Although I never had my day in court, which I would have absolutely loved to have had, because you could have then challenged Corbyn on was he or was he not an anti-Semite. And I have nothing to change that has happened that's changed my view of him personally. But it was it was a misogyny, a little bit of misogyny. There's always still misogyny in most places, and it thrives in the Labour Party. But it was just because I was such a vocal critic of Corbyn. There's a lot of criticism behind closed doors, and I never do that. I always do. I'm known for saying it as it is, and I did it to him. Yeah.
There's a question here from Alex Eagle. With the start of normalization of relations between the United Arab Emirates and Israel, how does this square with the left? Presumably he refers to the fact that some of these Middle Eastern states are not the most forward-looking, perhaps. How do you see this as a Labour MP? Good thing, bad thing, or perhaps a bit of both?
No, definitely good. Definitely good, absolutely no doubt. But I am quite depressed at the moment. I don't know how you all feel about it. But I'm quite, I've always been a two-state solution person, but I'm, especially if they're going to be new settlements. So we'll see what happens to all that. But I'm quite depressed about the prospects for a two-state solution. I think it matters more who becomes president in the United States, probably. Yeah. And that will have the biggest impact on, is there a potential solution for peace? I mean, the two, we have got to, in the end, there has got to be a political solution to the conflicts, and that has to requires, I know it's sort of, it's hard for everybody, but it means everybody's got to give way in some way. And I'm quite pessimistic at the moment about the potential for a two-state solution. I can't see anything else. So I think what happens in the States is our best prospect for the future. And then that they take an active interest, that it becomes part of the agenda. And just let me say something else about just world politics. One of the impacts of the pandemic is it's encouraging this very sort of inward-looking nationalism. And that inward-looking nationalism, you become Little Britain, we're going to produce everything in Little England, we're increasingly becoming Little England. So everything becomes, you've got to produce everything local, internally. Your international perspectives get very highly challenged, and that's not good for settling the sort of conflicts that we have in the Middle East or elsewhere in the world.
Margaret, thank you very much for joining us this morning. I'm sorry we didn't get time for all of the questions which were submitted from the floor. But I'd like to hand over now to Melvin Burward, who is one of the UJIA trustees and also chairs the Legacy and Plan Giving Committee, to conclude the proceedings this morning. Melvin, you're on mute. That famous phrase.
Hopefully you can hear me now. Margaret, thank you so much for being with us today. We really appreciate you giving up your time to talk to us, to be part of a UJIA event. Speaking personally, although I've never actually voted Labour, you gave me great pride. When you were when they wanted to deselect you, I felt they attacked us all. And the way you acted and the dignity and the strength was a source of pride to the whole community, and also a source of fairness within Britain that we should all be proud of, regardless of our party affiliations. So thank you for being with us today, and I hope you'll join us at another time. To everyone listening, we've had over 50 computers, which I think probably means more than 100 people with us today. Thank you all for joining us. Harvey spoke about the events UJIA have coming up very soon, and we really do hope that you will join us. Can I reinforce Harvey's mention of the legacy campaign that UJIA runs. It's a really, really important part of the way we today can support Israel and the Jewish community in the UK into the future. So my thanks to you all. Shana Tova, Happy New Year, and thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Melvin, and thank you, Margaret, and wishing everybody a happy and most importantly, healthy New Year.
Thank you.